Hello, welcome to the Honest Wargamer. I'm your host Rob. I stream almost every day on Twitch talking about Warhammer. Every Monday on the Age of Sigmar Stats Center with my co-host Owen Jackson. We look at event results from around the world and we deep dive trends and look at some of the good lists that we see play. I also do live coverage and commentate on the largest Age of Sigmar events in the world, and we run the Super Series, all over on the T-Sports Network. Hello, I'm Rob from the Honest Wargamer. Today I'm going to be looking at the Age of Sigmar FAQ. Some big changes for loads of different armies, and it might affect how you play your games. Now, just a quick point for some people who may not know, the FAQ is something that regularly comes out from Games Workshop, and you can find it on warhammercommunity.com/FAQ. Your battle tomes aren't necessarily the true source of all information, and sometimes you have to pick through the FAQs and how they affect your army. I'm going to go through some of the highlights from today's FAQ, and hopefully that will let you know what you need to look for. Okay, let's start with the core rules. There are some really janky small interactions which have been clarified, which I won't cover here, but there are some pretty big takeaway pieces we need to talk about. The first one, which is fairly obvious, is that you can't unleash hell after you've redeployed a unit. I mean, it does say, but for some reason they've clarified it. Another one is that you can stop a unit halfway up a wall if you need to, so you can charge units that are higher than maybe your move distance is. However, the terrain rules are fairly janky anyway, so whether or not you do use that or don't use that, it doesn't really matter. Some big changes are how wards work. Now, wards are a save that you make after you've made an armor save, or a save that you might get to take against a mortal wound. I'm re-recording the ward save bit because hella confusing, and we're doing this live basically. So, ward saves, how do they work now? There's a big change, and specifically what they've effectively allowed is multiple ward save stacking, although specifically not that. I know, what the hell do I mean? So, if you make a ward save, you're good. You can't then make another ward save, okay? So you can't stop wounds and mortal wounds with one ward save after another. However, there are loads of rules in the game that are not ward saves, or they're not under the ward save category. And this means that you can make a ward save, and then you can make something that's like a ward save, specifically Disgusting Resilience, or a Stonehorn save. So you can have the Amulet of Destiny, which gives you a ward save of a 5-up, big thumb, and then you can use your Skeleton Skin, or whatever the rule is called, for another 5-up, not ward save. Damage prevention roll is what we've always called it on the show, a DPR. Now, this is going to affect loads of different units. It is a massive change. It's really crazy because they did away with multiple ward stacking previously because you could have some very strong survivable units. Now, go crazy. Now, you're going to have to be very specific with the wording, and that's really awkward because I would like to see everything just have the ward save classification. It makes it easier for you guys, it makes it easier for me. We don't have to have long conversations or rows about if it is or if it isn't. But right now, you're able to do a ward save, and you're able to do another type of save that's like that isn't specifically called a ward save. So there you go. Run to your books and try and find your cool combinations and leave the best ones in the comments below. The other big change to ward saves is how it affects bodyguard units. Bodyguard units, like Saurus Guard for instance, could normally take wounds for a character. In this situation though, you can't make a ward save for a unit and then try to use the bodyguard rule. You either use one or use the other. This is a great change, and it means you just don't have these ridiculously unkillable characters. Next up is Pilings, and they've clarified something that's a little bit janky, but it makes a load of sense if you do it. Let's say you have a unit of 10 models, and then it's pinned by 2 monsters, and they're equal, and both bases are touching that model. Would you be able to take that unit and pile in closer to one monster than you are the other? And the answer is no, because they're equidistant between them, or specifically the models are equidistant between them. The model wouldn't be able to move between two. So if you had one single model trapped by, let's say, 2 monsters, so you had one monster trapped by 2 monsters, that singular monster wouldn't be able to pile in closer to the other 2 or anything, to one of them and away from the other one, effectively is what it's saying. With the larger unit, you wouldn't be able to make those piling moves because obviously at that point you would be out of coherency. This is a nice, clear, simple change. Just means you could do some janky fun stuff with how you charge units and kind of control your opponent. It's nice, simple. Good change. Next up, they've clarified what happens if you destroy a garrison with units inside. Now, normally when you get a unit out of a garrison, it has to be wholly within 6 inches of the garrison. They've clarified that if you do destroy the garrison, that unit has to do it, and it has to be 3 inches away from the enemy. If you can't set them wholly within 6 inches and 3 inches from the enemy, each model that you can't set up like that is destroyed. Very much like a transport in 40k. It's nice, clear, simple rules change and some good clarity. They've also clarified how objectives work when they're not wholly within a territory. There are some battle plans where there are objectives which are not wholly in either person's territory, and they've clarified that they aren't, and this is really useful for battle tactics. They've also clarified what happens when you have an effect that might increase the range of a spell. Now, this is really important in how it interacts with endless spells. Like on a War Scroll, if you have a character or a wizard, let's say, with a War Scroll spell, that's a spell. And the spell on an Endless Spells War Scroll is also a spell. So when you cast it, you can increase its range that you cast it at by any special ability that does so. This is really important because it does mean that you're able to cast spells through an endless spell portal. Through the spell portal, you're able to cast an endless spell through it. Now, this might only affect certain armies and units and certain endless spells, but it is a really big change, or more importantly, a really good and clear piece of clarity on how that works, because it was a little unclear beforehand. Now, I know you might be thinking, what the hell, Rob? How is an endless spell and a spell different, or how is an endless spell like a spell? But that's just how it works. It's actually inside your core rules if you want to go check it out. And finally, but not the only core rule change, is we've had some clarity on how enhancements work, specifically with spell laws and mount traits. You can use flaming weapons on your mount's weapon profiles, or specifically one of your mount's weapon profiles, but you can't give flaming weapons the spell to unique characters. So Archaon can't take flaming weapons, but you can have an anointed on a Frostheart Phoenix be able to cast the spell flaming weapons on the claw attack. And lastly, each character is only able to take one mount trait, or specifically a character mounted on a mount is only able to take one mount trait, and you can't duplicate the same mount trait across your army, which is nice. RIP double metal cruncher or many metal crunchers. So overall, I think some nice clarity on a lot of these changes. I think generally not too bad. I'm really sad not to see save stacking get addressed in this particular part of the FAQ, because it's pretty obnoxious, ultimately. Being able to add pluses to your save so that you effectively ignores Pip of Rend is pretty bad, and I don't think particularly good for the health of the game. I'd like to see that get cleared up in the future, but as it is now, you're going to have some very tanky units in Age of Sigmar. Okay, let's talk other big changes, and some big ones, and I'm very excited about these. Pink Horrors have had a completely new War Scroll rewritten for them, and it's great. Pink Horrors were very confusing beforehand because we didn't have any clarity on what maximum unit size was. That has been cleared up now in the core rules, which is great, but they've changed pretty significantly. And the key changes is that whenever you kill a Pink Horror, it explodes into 2 blue horrors. The Pink Horror, it doesn't count as being slain, which is really, really important, because that means you can't use Rally, the command ability, or Emerald Lifeswarm to return a model, because they're not slain models, they're just exploded models, I guess. This also means that they don't count as slain for Battle Shock, which is huge, really, really big. So that means that when you have 10 Pink Horrors, they effectively, when you kill them all, they explode into 20 blues. And then you have to kill all the 20 blues who explode, or they split and split again, specifically into Brimstone Horrors. That means the first 30 damage you do into that unit won't count towards Battle Shock. So they're effectively Battle Shock immune until you've done over 30 damage to the unit. Also, their Hornblower, for some reason, gives them +1 save. So it's a unit that used to have a 6-up armor save and has now got +1 to that save, not to the characteristic, to the save roll, which is really important. So when you put Mystic Shield on them, all that means is that they'll have a 5-up armor save and they'll ignore Rend of 1. But that's still pretty good. Or they'll just have a 5-up armor save as long as they've got the Musician in it. But they'll only have the Musician for the first 10 wounds in the unit, which is pretty key. Anyway, very, very interesting changes to the War Scroll, and it does mean that there's no confusion anymore about how they work. They also generate fate points as well from the banner, which has also had a change. Ultimately, as someone who's run Pink Horrors in Age of Sigmar 3, I think it's still a very positive change. The unit's really strong, it's got really good shooting, and it's a great wound sink of 50 wounds for 215 points. It's a good change because it's really cleared stuff up for the community, and I'm pro it. I think it's great. Next up for Chaos, we had a load of clarity on coalition changes and how units go in there. Just clarity, really, nothing overly confusing. One of the key changes, though, is to Archaon. Now, Archaon has been a demon in competitive Age of Sigmar, as you all know, and has been really, really good in games and has won many tournaments and has podiumed really well, specifically going into Tzeentch Archaon. Now, while they haven't changed him being able to go into Tzeentch Allegiance or into Khorne Allegiance, because he has on his own War Scroll that he's able to do so, they have changed his Eye of Shireen, or the Eye of Ed Sheeran, as I call it, which previously was any sixes to hit, you have to reroll. That was sixes in shooting or sixes in combat. And when he was also in Tzeentch and he was -1 to hit, it was so strong. Like, it was so hard to do any damage to him. Now, they haven't got rid of save stacking, but with the Eye of Shireen, what they have done is they've changed it from sixes. Any sixes to hit have to be re-rolled. They've made it so that once per battle, it's -1 to be hit, which doesn't stack with Tzeentch at all. It's a nice change. It makes him a lot less survivable, but he still is one of the most survivable models in Age of Sigmar. Effectively able to heal 15 D3 over the course of a game, -1 to hit if he is in Tzeentch, which is good. Has a 3-up armor save, so with Mystic Shield or in their finest hour, already goes to a 2-up and therefore can ignore Rend of 1. You can put him in Idolaters as well, and you can give him crazy save stacking. So he's still very survivable, but this is a great change for competitive Age of Sigmar. Not enough. It's not enough, but in my personal opinion, some of you who run in Archeon will be like, it's way enough. Like, he's nerfed and terrible now, but that's not true. He's still so good. So good. So, good change. Another nice little change is that Varangard have got elite, so they're able to issue command abilities themselves, which makes loads of sense. If a Gyrocopter could be an elite, Varangard definitely should be elite as well. For Daughters of Cain, nothing much other than the Shadow Queen has now got Rend 2 on a spear, as she should do, so a little bit more scary in combat. Also, big buffs for OBR, our OCR Bone Reaper friends, in that they're able to now issue the same command ability more than once. You can't issue a command ability on a unit more than once, i.e. a unit can't be affected by a command ability more than once, like in that phase. However, you are able to cast or use a command ability on multiple units. Specifically, this means Mortek Guard. You can have more than one unit of them reroll saves, which is quite nice. A change we didn't see is Protection of Nagash change, which is when you cast Protection of Nagash on a model, specifically on Nagash, that's really important, and he fails that ward save that he has, he's able then to teleport anywhere on the board and then move after. Incredibly strong. Really expected to see that get an FAQ change. It's really good and is probably one of the builds for OBR at the moment. But OBR have got to be really happy. Also, Arcan is able to now cast multiple Arcane Bolts, but isn't able to cast multiple Mystic Shields. And you also got some of those key units like Necropolis Stalkers and Morghasts all gain the elite keyword, so they're able to issue commands as well, which is really nice for some of them, so they can operate on their own out there in the wild. Overall, massive buffs to OBR, so they've got to be feeling really, really good. A range of other armies got some clarity and also some buffs, and some got some nerfs. Let's start with Sons of Behemoth. Their Longshanks rule has been changed, so now they basically ignore terrain and units when they run and when they move, but not in the charge phase. This is a really good rule change because it was really unclear beforehand. It's nice and neat, and it's really good for those Sons of players because, as we know, they just love walking forward to stand on an objective to win a game. Gloomspite Git's got a slight buff, specifically Squig Hoppers now. They do mortal wounds when they retreat and also when they run as well, which is okay. I mean, the faction needs a lot of help. It's not a lot. They didn't even make Scragrot a general in addition to any other generals you have, which is a bit of a shame, but I mean, we're all hoping for a new battle tome soon. I'm sure Git's players don't care, but I would think that they would want some more buffs than this. Cities of Sigmar, almost nothing other than a change to Hallowheart, where Hallowheart wizards know 2 spells from the spell lore, which is great because they obviously can cast an additional spell anyway, meaning that they now can choose 2 spells as well, and they don't have to pay for an enhancement to do that. So that's a nice little change. Other than that, cities are obviously in a great place, and they're fine. So, I don't think they need loads of clarity, so they're in a good spot. Kharadronoverlords have got a really big buff actually in this FAQ. Specifically, the normal move that you make, or specifically Fly High being a normal move, interacts quite nicely with the Alpha Beast Pack, which is a battalion that you can take from the General's Handbook. Most TOs have ruled it, as have I, that they don't interact with each other and that the Alpha Beast Pack normal move doesn't mean you can fly high, but Games Workshop have clarified this as being you can. So that means putting those big ironclads in those Alpha Beast Packs are going to be something that I think that you'll see. They've also said that when you use the artifact spell in a bottle to cast an endless spell, that the wizard, or not even the wizard, the engineer, whoever's holding the bottle, is unable to control that endless spell like a wizard who casts an endless spell, which is good, but it was always Vortex anyway, so it doesn't matter. A really big buff for Nurgle is actually not found in the Nurgle Maggotkin FAQ. It's actually found in the Wrath of the Everchosen. The Magnificent Wanderers, which is a sub-faction, have got the last gift, which previously was any 6s to hit while holding within 12 inches would cause a mortal wound to your opponent. However, this has been changed to a 1, which is actually a huge buff, because normally you would see the Wither Stave taken in a Nurgle army, which means your opponent has to reroll 6s. So now you get the bonus of having the Wither Stave for reroll 6s, and any 1s to hit are going to cause them to do a mortal wound to themselves. Straight, flat buff. Really strong, really good. For Skaven, if you have over 6 giant rats, you're mental. And you get a 2-inch reach on their weapons now. Those are the two statements which definitely go hand in hand. Okay, Sylvaneth have had a rough times. This is their 4th War Scroll change to Wildwoods, which is the big takeaway from the Sylvaneth FAQ. There's also a command ability change, but it's pretty redundant. The change to Wildwood is pretty bad because in Age of Sigmar 3, the Wildwood got changed to being what, or maybe it was actually even in the End Times book, not the End Times book, the Broken Realms book. They changed it so that you could use the Wildwoods to teleport from. So instead of the Allegiance ability, it was the War Scroll for Wildwoods that you could teleport to and from. This has now changed, unfortunately, and has been FAQ'd out, which seems just like a huge oversight because they've changed it back to an earlier version, very much like we've had with Morathi's Heartrender going from Rend 2 to Rend 1 to Rend 2 to Rend 1. It's a huge oversight, and I would honestly like to see this change, or even just comp to events by players. Sylvaneth have had a tough time anyway, even though they've done quite well competitively recently. I'm not saying that they're bottom tier. What I'm saying is that their core Allegiance ability doesn't really work, and the new Wildwood update has effectively broken it again for no real change and for no real reason. It's just lazy, it doesn't work, and it's just something that needs to be addressed. If I was a TO or if I was a player going to an event, I would speak to a TO and say, hey, look, my core Allegiance ability is centered around these things that I paid money for, but Games Workshop hasn't made them work well. There is a version of the rules that work. Could we just use that? And I think a lot of people would be okay with that. I'm a long-time Sylvaneth player, so I'm really triggered about this, but that's fine. It's fine. 2 other major updates is loads of units became legends, and this effectively means they're no longer in matched play. So if you were to go to an event, and basically if you're playing games at home, they're not current rules. Very much like if you played Magic the Gathering and they were last edition's cards or something like that. They're just not in rotation anymore, and they won't be in rotation. I'm obviously really sad about this because my Chaos Dwarfs have been put into Legends, but it's actually quite nice because we've actually got some updates. And then in positive news, we got some of the Monstrous Arcanum units got rules changes and also points changes. Not really loads to sing about from there. I think probably one of the most standout points is the Rogue Idol got the Cruel Boys keyword, and that's going to be really, really useful when we see whatever that battle tome looks like. So it's sad and it's positive because for ages, since Age of Sigmar 3 was announced, we were unsure about how some of these models were going to work in the games or if they were valid. And so it's nice having that clarity now because we know what we're going to do with our models. So I'm really happy about that. And some of the War Scroll changes are actually quite neat. Okay, so just some quick thoughts on what we're missing specifically. It was Flesh Eater Courts, Idoneth Deepkin, Lumineth Realmlords, and Nighthaunt, none of which seem to have had an update so far as of time of recording. It might change, but that currently is the situation. And then let's talk about actual issues that we don't think were addressed, or in my opinion. So I do the Age of Sigmar Stats Center with my co-host Owen, as well as doing loads of Age of Sigmar shows through the week. And if you're watching, it's on this YouTube channel or in this podcast, so I'm sure you guys have listened to that. And there's been some pretty persistent problems in Age of Sigmar since its release. I personally think the game is in a really good place. I think the battle tactics are great. I think the game is probably the best it's ever been. Structurally, the rules are fairly clear, even if we don't agree with some elements of it. However, there are some really powerful things we would have liked to see addressed, we haven't seen addressed in this errata FAQ. So those are balance issues, I guess. So if you want to hear about them, here we go. First up, probably not the strongest thing, but I think probably one of the most unengaging things that we've seen in Age of Sigmar would obviously be the Wind Spirits for Lumineth Realmlords. They have an ability to move in your opponent's shooting phase, making them effectively unchargeable, but you can charge them if you have like a 3d6 charge. So they are chargeable. That's really important, unlike Manfred. So I would have liked to have seen that only be able to move in the end of their shooting phase. However, that has stayed, and that seems to be as intended. Same with Chronomantic Cogs. Now, this is amazing, and as a Tzeentch player, so happy that this has stayed, but it is not good for the game, ultimately. This is every wizard within 6 inches can cast an extra spell. Incredible for Tzeentch armies who want to cast additional spells. Also really strong for Lumineth armies as well. I'm going to say that I think I would have liked to have seen that change to just 1 unit within 6 can cast an extra spell. We haven't seen that, so I think you're going to see Tzeentch armies doing really well, generating a load of fate points, and also Lumineth armies with loads of options in what spells they're going to cast each turn. Now, a pretty massive one is obviously save stacking, and I've touched on this already, but I'll just re-clarify. You can add +1 to your save roll with, let's say, a Mystic Shield, and then All-Out Defense will also do an additional +1. However, you only get +1 to your save characteristic, so from a 4 up to a 3 up, but when I add an additional +1, I basically will ignore the first pip of rend. This is pretty obnoxious on units like Archaon, who goes to a 2-up save and then starts ignoring Rend 1 or Rend 2 even. It also is pretty scary on Stonehorns. It's also really good on Gargants. It's good on lots of things, effectively, because they are ignoring Rend. So it makes Rend pretty worthless, and a lot of the units are really pointed, if they're pointed for anything at all, to have Rend. So not being able to have them is pretty sad, and it would have been, I think, the key takeaway from this edition. I think if this FAQ was going to do anything to touch on balance, that would have been the most applauded one. This is a fascinating kind of like double take when you actually realize that they've intentionally or unintentionally produced save stacking or ward stacking really in DPR stacking. Now again, I touched on this earlier, so just to be clear, you can't double stack wards, but you can stack a ward and then a damage prevention roll of another kind. Now it might be unclear as to how effective that's going to be, but it seems like you can make some pretty obnoxious builds already just off the top of my head. I would like to have seen that go away. That, with save stacking, seems like a big negative to carry on. However, they have said this edition is meant to be monsters. Maybe you guys love pushing your Archaons and your Sons of Behemoth around and you think that it's fine, in which case that's all gravy. For me personally, I would have liked to have seen it move around a little bit, but there we go. Lastly, not that it's new, but I really would have liked to have seen the Umbral Spell Portal go away from the game. That's a me thing, and probably not everyone agrees with me, but I do think it's been an issue for a long time, the ability to do spells from that range, because the units that can do it quite well also have pretty obnoxious spells. That's probably the only real follow-up I would have liked to have looked at, and it was probably unlikely to have happened, to be honest. That's more of a wish listing element. I would really like to know what you guys would have liked to have seen from the FAQ. It's something that is always of interest to me, because whenever you're playing any faction, there's lots you learn about different armies. That's why I try and talk to as many people who play as many armies as possible constantly, so I can kind of take on their passions and their thoughts. So I'd love to know what you guys think, and if you could leave it in the comments below, that would be ace. So ultimately, a mixed bag. We got some clarity, which is good. We got some unanswered questions, which is weird. We got some nerfs, which seemed really odd. And then we got some buffs, which also seemed odd as well. Now, normally, although we don't get much of a roadmap for Age of Sigmar, we would be expecting to see some updates actually for balance issues in winter. We have this thing called the Winter FAQ. Games Workshop haven't actually made any statements as to whether or not they're going to stick to a Winter FAQ every year this year, and so we're unsure about that. And obviously with Battle Tomes coming out soon, and with the app apparently out in September, hopefully we'll get some more clarity on what we're going to see going forward. Thanks for listening to the video. If you've enjoyed what I've done, I'm actually live on Twitch most days talking either Age of Sigmar or 40k. We do the Age of Sigmar Stat Center, which you can go and check out, and we produce loads of content. Also, we put a lot of the lists that do fairly well at competitive events on the honestwargamer.com, so you can go check that out as well. Thanks to everyone on the Honest Wargamer Patreon who makes it so that I can do this for a living, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a nice day.